Welcome to Whole Bible Study with your host, me, Taddy Noy. Now, before we slow down and take a deep look at Numbers chapter 16 in our deep dive, we need to situate ourselves in the larger biblical story so far, because this chapter does not stand on its own. It grows out of everything that has come before it. Now, Israel at this point has been brought out of Egypt through a dramatic act of liberation. Slavery has ended, but freedom has not yet been learned. At Sinai, the people enter into a covenant with God. Laws are given, not simply as rules, but as a way of shaping a new kind of society. The tabernacle was constructed as a portable sacred center. The tribes were organized. The Levites were set apart for specific ritual responsibilities. Leadership roles were clarified, sometimes repeatedly, because clarity was necessary for survival. But in the wilderness, the journey has not been smooth. The people have complained about food, water, fear, leadership, and direction. Trust has broken down repeatedly. In Numbers 13 and 14, Israel refuses to enter the land, and the consequences are an entire generation wandering until a new one can rise. Now that decision fractures morale. Authority becomes strained, and the future feels uncertain. Chapter 16 happens in this context. This is not a rebellion in a stable society. This is dissent inside a fragile, forming people who are still learning who they are and how they are meant to function. This chapter tells the story of Korah, Dathan, Abraham, and a group of 250 leaders who challenge Moses and Aaron. They claim that the congregation is holy, and that Moses and Aaron have overstepped their authority. What follows is judgment, catastrophe, intercession, and loss. The story is difficult. It is uncomfortable, but it is doing something serious in this work. Now let's turn to the deep dive, a deeper look at chapter 16. At the center of Numbers 16 is a question about holiness and authority. Korah says, all the congregation is holy. In Hebrew, the word for holy is kadosh. Holiness in the Hebrew Bible does not mean moral superiority. It means being set apart for a purpose. Time can be holy. Space can be holy. Objects can be holy. People can even be holy. Holiness always involves distinction. Korah's claims are not false. Exodus 19 already says that Israel is called to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. The problem is not the statement. The problem is how it is being used. Korah is a Levite, specifically from the Kohathite clan. That matters. The Kohathites were entrusted with carrying the most sacred objects of the tabernacle. They were already close to the center of holiness. Anthropologically, this is important because studies of hierarchical religious systems show us that internal conflict most often arises not from the margins, but from those close to power. Proximity usually creates a type of comparison, and comparison creates a type of resentment. Over time, privilege can usually turn into resentment. Responsibility can begin to feel like ownership, and sacred duty can blur into self-importance. Now, that is not unique to ancient Israel. That is a human pattern. Korah appears to believe that because his role is important, it must also be equivalent to Moses' role. Now, Scripture does not support that conclusion. Moses' leadership is not presented as honorary or symbolic. Moses functions as a covenant mediator, lawgiver, and intercessor in a way that nobody else in Scripture does. God repeatedly affirms that distinction. This brings us to a tension that runs throughout the Torah. Holiness is shared, but roles are differentiated. Everyone matters, but not everyone does the same thing. Equality of value does not mean sameness of function. Ancient societies that survived understood this well. Archaeology from Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Canaan shows highly specialized labor systems, especially in religious context. Survival depended on it. In Numbers chapter 16, God is not creating hierarchy for the sake of dominance, God is enforcing differentiation for the sake of cohesion. This is an early stage of forming a people. Early stages usually require clarity, a lot of it. And without clarity, fragmentation will usually accelerate. So the rebellion itself crosses tribal lines. Korah is a Levite. Dathan and Abiram are from Reuben. Reuben is the firstborn tribe, and sociologically this also matters. Reuben lost preeminence earlier in Genesis. That loss still echoes. This rebellion is not only theological, it is most likely historical resentment resurfacing. When Moses hears that the challenge, he falls on his face. That detail matters because he does not immediately assert control. He does not punish. He submits to the situation to God. Moses repeatedly acts as a reluctant leader. He did not seek this role. He has resisted it from the beginning. His authority is functional, not self-generated. The test Moses proposes involves incense and censers. Incense are not neutral. It is a priestly act. Offering incense assumes a particular calling. In Hebrew, to draw near is karav. Holiness is about controlled nearness. Drawing near without authorization is very dangerous in priestly theology. It is not about exclusion, it is about boundaries. The judgment that follows is severe. The earth opens, fire consumes the incense bearers. Many modern readers want to soften this. At the same time, whether this happened exactly as described is not the main issue. What really matters is what the people experienced real consequences for destructive behavior, and that they interpreted those consequences through the language of divine judgment. Ancient societies did not separate natural disaster, social collapse, and divine action the way the modern societies do. Anthropology shows that catastrophe was always interpreted theologically. The story is telling the truth about consequences, not offering a forensic report. The Hebrew word often translated as rebellion is makaloket, meaning division or dispute. Rabbinic tradition contrasts disputes, quote, for the sake of heaven, with disputes, or, quote, not for the sake of heaven. Korah's rebellion is the latter. It fractures the community without building anything sustainable. After the initial judgment, the congregation blames Moses and Aaron. This is another human pattern. When consequences come, people look for a mediator to accuse. A plague follows. Aaron runs with incense and stands between the living and the dead. This is important because as we've said, it is not the main point of the chapter. It shows that mediation was offered. It shows that leadership tried to protect the people, but the formation of the community still requires boundaries. So now we need to address the hardest part. Why remove dissenters? Why such finality? From a sociological perspective, early stage communities are fragile. Too much internal fracture can destroy them before they stabilize. Foundational moments often involved harsh lessons. This is true in political revolutions, religious movements, and nation formation. Ancient Israel is no exception. This did not mean dissent is always wrong. It means timing and posture matter. There is a difference between critique that builds and rebellion that destabilizes. Number 16 presents dissent that undermines formation itself. This chapter must not be used to justify abusive leadership. Authority here is not unchecked. Moses is consistently accountable to God. Aaron's role is constrained. Leadership is functional and bounded. There are checks and balances, even if they do not look modern. We must also be clear that humans are not the final judges of God's will. Interpretation is always secondary. We are always discerning. We are always guessing to some degree. That humility is essential when we're looking at interpreting Scripture. So I read everything through the lens of Jesus. When Jesus says, we will know them by their fruits, he's talking about outcomes. In Greek, the fruit is karpos. Fruit is what a tree produces. A theology that produces harm, domination, and fear is bad fruit. A theology that produces wisdom, stability, humility, and care is good fruit. This principle does not override Torah. It aligns with it. Wisdom literature operates the same way. Rabbinic interpretation often asks what a teaching produces in real life. So number 16 should not be silence legitimate critique. It should not shield leaders from accountability. It should not be weaponized to control people. If it is used in those ways, it produces bad fruit and fails its own test. Instead, this chapter teaches us about the danger of confusing shared holiness with identical calling. It warns against letting privilege turn into entitlement. It reminds us that early formation requires clarity. It shows that leadership carries weight and consequences. It insists that communities must be structured if they are to survive. Archaeology supports this. Stable, ancient societies have clear role differentiation. Religious centers required specialized caregivers, or caretakers. Law codes enforced boundaries. Without this, collapse followed. Now, number 16 is not about crushing people. It's about protecting a people before they fully exist. The God revealed here is not arbitrary. This God is forming something fragile and future-oriented. Judgment is not random violence. It is consequence interpreted through covenant. Now, this chapter invites us to ask hard questions about ourselves. We are not confusing importance with equivalence. We are turning responsibility into entitlement. Are we confusing importance with equivalence, and are we turning responsibility into entitlement? Are we seeking roles we are not given instead of doing well the work we have? It also invites us as leaders to humility. Moses falls on his face. He does not defend himself with power, authority. Authority here is reluctant, heavy, and accountable. Number 16 is not an easy chapter. It is not meant to be. It belongs to the early painful work of becoming a people. And it reminds us that formation always has a cost. Now, thank you for walking with me through this chapter with me. If this study has been meaningful, I invite you to support the work of Mustard Seed Ministries. These documentaries and podcasts exist because of the generosity and shared commitment. If this speaks to you, please leave a note or share it with a friend. And we'll see you in the next chapter soon.